We're going to move next into product pricing. Um, and we look at that in terms of three components. We've got our selling price, we've got kind of the target we'd like to achieve in the long run, and we need to sell our product for enough to cover what it costs to make it. In other words, that's kind of our break-even point where we don't lose any money. Plus, we need to make a reasonable profit. We're not here to just cover expenses. We want to have something to put in our pocket at the end of the day. There's a couple ways we can approach product pricing. We can do it based on the demand method. In other words, what is a customer willing to pay? What's kind of the most we can charge before customers decide to say, you know what, the price is too high, I don't really need this item. And to some extent that's going to be determined based on whether or not this is a luxury item or a staple. And this is otherwise referred to as, whatever the market will bear is what someone may be willing to charge under this method. On the other hand, there's the competition-based method. And so basically, if one competitor raises their price, the other ones generally follow suit. I think a pretty typical way that you would see this is with airline prices. One airline raises their price and then all of a sudden all the other ones do as well. So when we're determining our price, we can look at it based on the cost plus method. And so we're looking at product cost or total cost or variable cost, but we're beginning with a cost and then looking at that based on what we want to achieve in terms of a markup. So our normal selling price is our cost amount per unit plus the markup. Markups will vary widely based on industry, product, region, and so often an entrepreneur will say, well, I don't know how to price my product. And the best thing you can do is go out and do some market research, because what the markup that you would have on dental floss might be very different than the markup you would have on a cell phone. So we've got the cost per unit. We've included in this markup is the selling and administrative costs plus the desired profit that we want to achieve, and that gets us to our normal selling price. And again, this is just a breakdown of what the markup includes, which is our administrative, selling, and desired product, or profit, I should say. So in terms of determining our product costs, we've got to look at direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. And then we'll look at the selling and administrative costs separately as part of the markup. So to get our cost per unit, we've got our total product costs that we're spending on product divided by the number of units that we produce and sell, and that gets us our product cost per unit. And then we need to calculate our markup percentage. And again, that's the combination of the desired profit plus the total selling and administrative expenses. You'll hear that also referred to as G&A, general and administrative expenses. And you're going to divide that by the total product cost. That's going to give you your markup percentage. And how you arrive at this desired product is generally based on return on assets, which is a ratio that hopefully you're somewhat familiar with. And so based on the return on assets, you're going to multiply that by the total assets, and that's going to tell you what your desired profit is going to be. And then you determine the markup as a result of basically this equation here, that percentage by the cost per unit. And so we've got your product cost, your markup per unit, and then that gets you to your selling price. It's a really probably wordy example for what was a pretty basic concept. So here's our example. We've got the following data for 100,000 calculators that Digital Solutions Inc. expects to produce and sell during the current year. We've got direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead, and that gets us to our manufacturing costs. Then we go to selling and administrative costs, and then we have our total costs. We have total assets of $800,000 and a desired return of 20%. So our total product costs of 1.5 million, total selling and administrative of 170 gets us a total per unit product cost of $15,000. $15 per unit. We then need to calculate our markup percentage, which will then multiply by the per product cost that we calculated on the previous slide. So how do we get to that? We've got our desired profit, and we had calculated the desired profit by the desired return times the total assets. So that's 20% times 800, and that was given to us, I think, 2 slides ago. And so that's $160,000 in desired profit. So to get the markup percentage, we plug in the desired profit plus the total selling and administrative expenses divided by the total product cost. And that tells us that we get a 22% markup. If we multiply our product costs by that 22% markup, we have a markup per unit of $3.30. And added to the product cost, that gets us a normal selling price of $18.30, of which 15 covers our costs and $3.30 is our profit. Now, the example that we just looked at started with the product costs, and we worked forward to get our desired our markup price and our end cost. In this case, with target costing, we go backwards and we figure out what our this is basically, in the first example, we let our costs be whatever they are, and then we add the markup on top of that. Well, we still want the same markup, and we may not be able to raise the price enough to warrant the level of costs that we had. So in target costing, we come up with the markup, we figure out what we can sell it for, and then we basically try and squeeze our costs within that selling framework, that costing framework. Rather than letting the cost dictate it, we basically say, in order for us to make this, this is all we can spend to manufacture this product. And so again, this is a cost reduction method where we will try and force our costs to be within the framework rather than allowing the costs to be whatever they are and then adding the profit to the top of that to come up with the market price. Because yeah, if the customer won't pay it, then we still need to make money, and reducing our costs is the only way to do it. So we can approach this in any number of ways. We can simplify design, we can try and source our materials a little bit better to reduce the costs. We might be able to do something in terms of reducing our labor costs, or we may become more efficient and try and eliminate waste. But you got to be careful when you start cost cutting, because if you impact the quality of the product, you're going to cause yourself a whole other set of problems. So I'm going to just scroll briefly through this checkup corner. If you want to work through this on your own, you are certainly welcome to do that. We're going to wind up this chapter by talking about production bottlenecks. In all but the most efficient production processes, you're going to reach a point where there will be a bottleneck someplace in the process, either due to limited resources in one particular area or limited production capacity in one area. You could have the most efficient processes on the early stages, but if you've got a bottleneck in the middle, product will begin to stack up behind the point of the bottleneck, and that's going to, the most you will be able to manufacture will be determined based on the bottleneck, because again, you could have very efficient processes all the way before and after the bottleneck, but you're still going to be limited by what your bottleneck can produce. So when a company's got a production bottleneck, of course we want to always maximize profits, but we're going to have to, it's really going to be hinged on what that, how efficiently we can get product through that bottleneck. And so the unit contribution margin of each product per production bottleneck constraint is used. Hopefully you don't have multiple bottlenecks in a process, but you could. In this company, or in this example, we've got Pride Craft Tool Company. They've got 3 products, A, B, and C. All 3 get processed through a heat treatment operation, hardens the steel tools. Pride Craft Tools heat treatment process is operating at full capacity, and that's the production bottleneck. So they have maximized their resources, and they are still holding up the production line. The product unit contribution margin and the number of hours of heat treatment are in the chart below. So you can see the selling price and the variable cost for each unit. And each item requires a different amount of time in the heat treatment process. So product A only takes an hour, product B is 4 hours, product C is 8 hours. And so the contribution margin per bottleneck is going to be determined based on the degree to which that product is sort of involved in the bottleneck. So we've got the unit contribution margin divided by the heat treatment hours per unit. So again, you can see we've got the unit contribution margin for each one of these and the associated time here. And so we can see that, again, the first one, just it's an hour. So we've got $90 per hour for the heat treating process, $25 an hour for the 4 hours on product B, and $15 an hour for the 8 hours on product C. And this basically allows us to effectively allocate that heat treating process to the units that are utilizing that in the way that they're utilizing, I should say, that heat treating process. And I'm going to stop here. I am not going into Appendix C, the total cost method, so I'll just stop this slide at the end, and that concludes Chapter 11. And I'm actually going to stop this video here and go on to what will hopefully be the last video for this chapter.